back to part 4 of our Paper Mache Pumpkin Reaper tutorial. This is the final segment. In this final segment, we're going to sculpt in our hands. We're going to attach our skull to our neck. We're going to apply the cloth cloak, and we're going to paint and seal. But first things first, let's quickly go over tools and materials that you're going to need for this final segment. Alright, for the final segment, tools and materials that you're going to need, paper mache clay, paper mache paste, hot glue gun and sticks, drywall joint compound. You're going to need some latex paint. I have black latex paint and primer exterior, a combination there. And I have a white paint and primer mix here. You're going to need various sizes of paintbrushes. You're going to need your cloth. This is just an old sheet that I picked up at a thrift store, relatively cheap. You're going to want some spray paint. This is a gloss orange. I use this to paint the inside of my jack-o'-lantern so that when it's lit up, it gives it a really nice pumpkin-like glow. And then lastly, you're going to want some kind of a sealer. This is a Minwax fast-drying polyurethane. It's a clear satin so that you can seal your prop and protect it from weather. You're also going to need one more thing. You're also going to need a bucket. You probably won't need a very big one, maybe one this size here. This is a 3.5 quart size bucket or something a little bit bigger, because that's what we're going to use to mix our what's called monster mud. If you're not familiar with that, it's the drywall joint compound and a latex paint combination, and that's what we're going to use to harden our cloth for our cloak. But that pretty much sums it up for tools and materials needed for this segment. Let's get started. Alright, as you can see, my bust, the arms that I've clayed over, the neck that I've clayed over, they're completely dry and hardened, as well as the bottom here. And I did clay in the opening. That's completely dry and hardened. So the next step that we have going on is we're going to attach our skull to our neck. So fire up your hot glue gun, get that ready so we can move forward with attaching the head. Alright, I'm just going to insert my head onto my neck, just so you could see all around in all the directions. Not that the back or even the sides here are going to make a difference, because they're not going to show. The only thing that might be showing, and that's if you choose to show it, is the front part of the neck here. So before we're going to hot glue it on first, and then we're going to clay it in. So before you hot glue it, you got a decision here to make. Do you want your head facing straight on, or do you want it slightly tilted in one direction? And that's going to be completely up to you. I think I'm just going to leave mine straight on, just like that. I'm going to start with my hot glue here. I'm just going to go in and squirt hot glue all the way around the base of the skull where it connects to the neck. I'm going to let that cool and set up and harden there. I'm going to go ahead and take some of my clay, and I'm going to press in some clay all the way around here. Make sure that I'm getting a good amount of clay up where the skull is attached to that neck and down a ways. It's not the hot glue that's going to permanently hold this head onto the neck. It's going to be this clay. So I want to make sure that I do get some up onto the skull itself and down onto the neck, as well as in that crease there or that seam where the skull meets the neck. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going to get some underneath the jaw area where it connects as well. Don't want to leave that out. And then, of course, what I'm going to do is go in with my paper mache paste and just smooth that out. Not that it's really going to matter if it's smooth, because once again, that's not going to show. The paste here is just going to make sure, or help to ensure, that this wet clay gets a really nice secure bond to that dry clay. All right, and there you have it. That should hold on there really nice and secure. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to move forward and sculpt in the hands onto the jack-o'-lantern. Hands. I'm not concerned about making these things anatomically correct or anything like that. What I want to do is I want to make them creepy. So I want them to be kind of like long, creepy, skinny looking fingers. So I'm just taking bits of my clay from this area here, which I would reference as being the wrist area. I'm just bulking up a little bit of clay around there. And I'm just laying on some clay. Now, if you want, I mean, you could go ahead, look at some reference pictures, or if you have a skeleton, you know, like a fake skeleton, you can look at the hands, the bones on your fake skeleton if you have one. You know, use that as a reference, of course. And then again, if you want your fingers to come kind of over, like the mouth area, that's what I'm doing here. I'm just sort of going to make that come over the mouth area just a little, this one finger here. These things are going to be really long and just creepy. So I'm not really doing too much shaping or anything like that at this point with this. I'm just laying on the clay with the fingers and where I want them to be, basically. Now keep in mind, when you're laying on the clay for your fingers, or basically for anything really, after it dries, it's going to shrink. So if you want them to be more prominent, lay on more clay. So that way, you know, they'll be a little bit more prominent, be a little bit more three-dimensional. Turn it this way so you can see it. Now to define this a little bit more, what I'm going to do is in certain areas like here, maybe like where there would be a knuckle bone or something like that, I'm just taking little bits of clay and adding it to kind of bulk up some of those areas there. Again, I don't care if this is anatomically correct. I'm not going for that. This is a Halloween prop. If that bothers you, then make them more anatomically correct. I mean, it's completely up to you. It's your sculpture. Now that I have that bulked out, I'm going to go in with my paste, smooth it over. Using my smaller brush. One thing that I should mention is that if you are using or you're recycling one of your paper mache jack-o'-lanterns and it's already painted and you've sealed it, it's a good idea on the areas where you're sculpting in the hands and the fingers to sand sand the pumpkin. Just lightly sand it. That will help the clay to bond a little bit better to the paper mache pumpkin. I mean, it'll still bond, it'll still hold if you just sculpt over, you know, where it has some of the sealant on it or the polyurethane spray on it or anything like that. It'll still stick, but it'll stick a lot better. It'll bond a lot better to the surface of the pumpkin if you don't have that on there. So that's what I did. I lightly sanded, lightly. You don't have to go crazy. I lightly sanded over those areas. And I'm just going to continue on here and get my paper mache clay fingers smoothed over, and then I'll do a little bit more shaping. I have my handy little cheap plastic sculpting tool, and that's what I'm using to just get in there, shape some of the fingers a little bit better, smooth it out a little bit better as well. Want to make sure that there are some gaps in between the fingers, and you know, you can spend as much or as little time on it as you want. Just make sure you get those finger shapes on there. Make it creepy. Smooth those out, shaped them a bit. Tip it this way so you could see it. Made sure I went in between the fingers so they don't look like they're just stuck together. The idea, well, my idea is that when I put the cloak on this guy, the cloak is basically going to come right about in here. So you're not really, or people are not really going to see this part so much, the hand. It's going to be the fingers. Now I really bulk these up, but again, keep in mind that once these dry, they're going to shrink up. So I wanted them to be pretty prominent, so I sculpted them out pretty thick, pretty pronounced. And I'm happy with that. Like I said, you could spend as much time on this as you want. This, for the purpose of this tutorial, for me, that's good enough. I'm going to go ahead and on this other side, I'm going to sculpt in the hand on this side as well, same way that I did the other one. Alright, as you can see, my hands have been sculpted and they're completely dry. So at this point, I am ready to apply my cloth cloak to this guy. I have an old piece of an old white bed sheet. The older and thinner, the better. If you have a black one, piece of black cloth, that would be optimal. I don't, so I'm going to use a white piece of cloth here. I've kind of cut it into a manageable size, and what I need to do now is just sort of kind of gauge how much of this I need to actually use and trim it down. So it's basically going to come over the head like that. And I'm going to drape it down something like that. So it's going to cover the arms. I don't know if you can see that. It's covering the arms. I don't want it to cover the hands, so it'll come down something like that on that side. As well as this side. So I have quite a bit hanging off here that I don't need. So I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to start trimming some of this excess off here. See what I end up with. got quite a bit on the back of it here that I don't really need. I don't need all that much on the back. So I'm going to trim that off as well. Something like that. All right, making monster mud. There are many different tutorials out there on YouTube on how to make monster mud. It's really pretty simple. You're going to need some latex paint. I'm going to use black exterior paint and primer latex paint. It's a 2-in-1 paint and primer latex. You can use whatever color that you have on hand, but because my cloak is going to be black, I'm going to use black latex paint. The other thing that is required is drywall joint compound. So it's 5 parts drywall joint compound to 1 part latex paint if you want to be really precise. I have a cup here that I'm going to use for my latex black paint, and then I just have like a flat little stir stick here that I'm going to use for my drywall joint compound. I have a bowl here. I don't need a big bowl. I'm only doing 1 cloak, so it's not going to require a large bucket or container. And then if I have any left over, I'm going to transfer that into a container. Monster mud will hold. It should be good as long as it's in an airtight container in not such a hot temperature. For probably 6 months or longer. So keep that in mind. I also have some shop towels here because this is going to get probably it's going to get a little messy. And I also have covered my table here with a piece of plastic because I am working inside my studio as opposed to working outside, because right now, unfortunately, there is a wildfire nearby and it's very, very smoky with hazardous air quality, so I'm working inside. So I'm going to mix up my my monster mud here. I'm not going to measure or get very precise doing the 5 parts drywall joint compound, the 1 part latex paint. I'm just going to glob some in here. That's probably, I don't know, I think I have maybe 5 heaping scoops in there. That should be enough for what I'm going to be doing. Bring this a little closer. I'm going to go ahead and, if your paint has been sitting, make sure that you stir it very well. I'm going to go ahead and pour some of my latex paint into my cup here. And then in turn, I'm going to pour my latex paint a little bit at a time in there. And you could use a mixer for this. If you're mixing up a large batch of it, you should probably be doing this in a large bucket, large container or large bucket, and using a paint mixing drill bit. And as you can see, as I am stirring this and mixing this, it doesn't look as black. It's turning out to be more of a gray because the drywall joint compound is white. That's not a big deal because I'm going to go in after I apply the cloak and it hardens. I'll go back and I'm going to paint it black. The Pumpkin Reaper that you see in the intros of my videos on this tutorial, I left the cloak that gray color. I didn't bother with going back and painting it. Alright, I think that's plenty. I could go back, add a little bit more drywall joint compound to it, which I think I will, because this is a little bit too runny. I want it a little thicker. So I'm just going to add a little bit more of the drywall joint compound in there. Thicken it up just a little bit. Like I said, I'm not being exactly precise. This is my method, and it has worked well for me. So if you have a method of making monster mud or something different to harden cloth onto a sculpture, use that instead of what I'm doing. I mean, if it's worked for you, go ahead and keep using that. Alright, just about ready to get that cloth in there and apply that cloak onto the Reaper bust. Alright, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. Some people take a paintbrush and they paint on the monster mud. I find that to be tedious and time consuming. What I do is I'll take the whole cloak, the whole piece of cloth, and this is where it does get messy, and I dip it into the monster mud mixture here. Make sure that I get all of the cloth covered in it. The goal is to get monster mud on all of the entire cloth. If you end up missing a few spots, it's not a big deal. You can hang this cloak onto your sculpture, and then you can go back with a paintbrush and apply to those areas that you missed. But do try to get as much of it covered as you possibly can. And if you're looking at this and saying, oh man, that's really messy, I don't know if I want to do it that way, you can always just get a piece of black cloth and just drape it over there and kind of like pin it in the areas that you want it to be pinned. But now I'm pretty confident that I've got my cloth here completely saturated. I'm just kind of squeegeeing it out now with my fingers so that it's not so goopy. Still going to be goopy, but I'm just kind of squeegeeing it out the best that I can with my fingers. Now that I've done that, I got to open up my cloth. That's why it's a good idea to do this outside. I mean, I wouldn't be covering your table and around your table so that you don't get this stuff in places that you don't want it inside your house. All right, time to drape. Concentrating on the front here. So get it on there, form it, scrunch it up into the areas where you want to have, so that it has a little bit more interest. Turn it around so you can see the back. Pulling this down so that the back of my bust is covered. That right there is the gist of it. I've got it on there the way that I like it, and now I just go ahead, put it in front of a fan or take it outside if it's a nice sunny day and let it harden. But that's how it looks. A very simple but effective method on applying a cloak or cloth to a sculpture. Alright, so after applying the cloth with that monster mud on it, it's been about 8 hours. It's still not completely hardened, but I wanted to give you a look at it in all directions here to see how it really just sticks and forms to the bust, to the sculpture here. So it's going to come out pretty cool, and again, it's starting to be more gray instead of black. You can, of course, nothing wrong with leaving it that darker gray. I'm going to see what it looks like after it completely dries, which will be another probably 8 hours or so. And then reevaluate whether I really want to go in there and take the time to paint over that cloak. So we'll revisit that. As usual, I have overestimated the time frame on what it's going to take to complete this tutorial. I really wanted to get it done in this final segment of part 4. Not going to happen. I really want to release this, get it uploaded, so that those of you that have been following along can continue. Once this is dry, we're going to go ahead in part 5 and start painting the whole thing and then sealing it, and then we're going to be done. So we're totally in the home stretch. Again, I didn't want this segment or these segments to get very lengthy, so trying to shorten it a little bit. So we're going to carry on in part 5 and finishing. I promise we're going to finish the whole thing, and we just need to, at this point, let this dry, and then we can go in and paint and seal it. So, as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so, and catch you in the next one. Catch them in the next one, right, Stella and Luna? Catch you in the next one.